Over the last decades, computer games and their corresponding industry have developed from a side issue to an often discussed and investigated topic. The genre of some of the most successful and popular games is the first-person shooter genre. Its rise began in the year 1996, when the American company id Software was the first to publish a first-person shooter featuring a virtual, three-dimensional environment including enemies and items depicted by polygon constructions. Its name was Quake. The same year, an updated multiplayer version of this game, Quake World, was released and gave birth to the competitive online gaming scene of first-person shooters. Online tournaments and leagues emerged so that players from all over the world could compete on the virtual battleground. As the player and fanbase grew, the demand for recordings of important or high-class matches did too, and accordingly, very soon the first videos depicting matches or highlights of the latter were uploaded to the internet. It was the beginning of what is today known as the Fragmovie scene. Frag is a term from the gaming jargon and basically means to kill an opponent virtually. A Fragmovie would be a compilation of the most spectacular actions and frags of the players. For the most part, these movies were only a few minutes long and primarily concerned with the presentation and celebration of the player's skill, instead of creating a complex storyline. With more and new games to enter the market, the Fragmovie community also expanded, and especially games like Quake 3, Unreal Tournament, Half-Life and Counter-Strike brought in not only new players, competitors and fans, but also new amateur directors that were eager to assemble, cut and edit new movies. In the early to mid-2000s, some of the released films featured new editing and presentation methods, and by that changed the way future Frag movies would be edited and looked at. In order to point out these developments and compare them to the medium film and post-classical cinema, selected scenes from movies and Frag movies will be discussed regarding camera work and editing. Other than fade-ins and fade-outs, these scenes will be shown unedited unless indicated otherwise. For the purpose of coherence, a restriction to Frag movies of only one video game seems beneficial, which is why only Counter-Strike movies will be analyzed in this video. The very first publicly recognized Counter-Strike video was a rather short clip featuring the famous Swedish player Emil Christensen, also known as HeatoN. It showed only a few seconds of unedited gameplay, but it combined the in-game footage with a somewhat fitting background music, and by that inspired people to create own clips. Only a few months later, the much longer movie Frag or Die was released. Especially the intro showed that Frag or Die was supposed to be more than a simple succession of frags. Before the actual frags could be seen, a slideshow of tinted, surreal-looking screenshots accompanied by Iron Maiden's Fear of the Dark set the tone. Nonetheless, the editing of the in-game scenes was minor. Some scenes were shown in slow motion in order to capture the frags, but other than that, the recordings stayed untouched. The first-person perspective is the only way to play Counter-Strike, so it is basically the default and most common way to present frags. However, Frag or Die relies solely on the first-person perspective for its shots, and there is no camera movement except the already existing movement of the players. In the following months, many other movies tried to recreate what worked well in Frag or Die, and add new elements to that. Early 2003, the video The Art to Frag depicted rather basic but precise and well thought out editing. It clearly tried to incorporate techniques used in traditional film without alienating itself from the Counter-Strike scene. As you can see, The intro is an homage to Frag or Die, but in contrast to its predecessor, the art of Frag uses multiple different perspectives, including establishing shots, close-ups, or just repetitions from other angles. However, most of the shots are rather long and usually do not violate the 180-degree rule. Their function is to show what is happening as well as possible, so the viewer can follow the action easily and be aware of the environment. When you leave slow motion and repeats out of consideration, compared to a classic action movie like Escape from New York, in some scenes parallels regarding the editing can be observed. Both share a small number of cuts and almost no camera movement. Another idea the art of Frag promoted is the synchronization of visuals and sounds. The Frag movie Hard Clan, Die Hard expanded this concept a lot further. Suddenly, the music does not only function as a soundtrack, but also affects the video track. A scream shakes the image, a booming bass makes it bounce, and by that, the first-person perspective is not a simple recording anymore, it has become a camera, displaying diegetic and non-diegetic elements.
Turn your back like you always do. Face away and pretend that I'm not, but I'll be here cause you're all that I got. I can't feel the way I did before. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored. Time won't change this damage anymore. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored. I'm a little bit insecure, a little unconfident, cause you don't understand to do what I can, but sometimes I don't make sense. What you never want to say, but I've never had a doubt. It's like no matter what I do, I can't convince you for once just to hear me out. So let go, watching you, turn your back like you always do. Face away and pretend that I'm not, but I'll be here cause you're all.
Most modern films obviously do not use sounds or music in the same way, but some do something similar. In order to present explosions, impacts or gunfire, the camera shakes. It is affected by what it is capturing, although the camera is not part of the film's internal world, and therefore non-diegetic, just as the music in Fragmovies. Late 2004, the Frag movie Ruination was released and managed to combine and improve the strengths of the art of Frag and Hard Clan Die Hard. It uses establishing shots, tracking shots, split screens, and non-diegetic elements to illustrate what is happening or what is about to happen. In addition to that, the different shots and cuts oftentimes line up the in-game action with the music, but never to the amount that the core of the movie, the depiction of Frags, is harmed.
Ready, steady, go.
In comparison to earlier movies, the editing pace has definitely picked up. There are also more close framings and far less long shots. Nonetheless, Ruination is an example of a coherent movie that uses editing techniques and effects to highlight Frags, and not Frags to highlight editing techniques. John McTiernan's Die Hard shows similar characteristics in the following scene. Even though many different shots, including close framings, are used to show the fight between the villain and the hero, the viewer can always keep track of where each of them is, especially due to the good use of varying two-shots. In both Ruination and Die Hard, the action is complemented by the editing, as both feature what David Bordwell calls intensified continuity. Another Frag movie of 2004 that is famous for its editing and in particular for its synchronization of diegetic and non-diegetic elements is Choual History X. Almost every single frag in the movie has some kind of non-diegetic response to it. When a frag happens, either a small flash or glow appears, the image is shaken, or the music delivers an acoustic response. This is done with such a consistency that it becomes impossible to assess whether the in-game action determines the editing and non-diegetic elements, or vice versa, the music, cuts and visual effects determine the frags. It all blends and becomes a homogeneous whole. In some way, the film District 9 can be compared to that, as it successfully blends diegetic and non-diegetic elements in the form of cameras. A number of shots seem to be part of a diegetic documentary. Others appear to be from surveillance cameras or diegetic handheld cameras, but they are always framed and supplemented by non-diegetic cameras.
First, a lot of attention was given to giving the aliens proper status and protection.
They're spending so much money to keep them here when they could be spending it on other things, but at least they keep...
In the Counter-Strike community, the opinions on Choual History X are quite diverse. Whereas the careful synchronization and integration of traditionally separate items cannot be debated, the never-ending camera shakes and the general density of visual distortions might feel exhausting to watch, even though, or maybe because, only the first-person perspective is being used. A film that comes to mind that shares similar problems would be Cloverfield. Roger Ebert writes in his review, "I heard some fellow audience members complaining that they felt dizzy or had vertigo. How much visual shakiness can we take? And yet, all in all, it is an effective film." A statement that could very well be on Choual History X. However, Cloverfield and Choual History X represent the extreme of a spectrum regarding the shaky camera, and both film and frag movies move towards a more moderate approach nowadays. Early 2009, the most popular German Counter-Strike team, Mousesports, released a new frag movie that combined a very clean, almost puristic look with fast-paced but precise editing and subtle synchronization of in-game action and the soundtrack. In contrast to earlier frag movies, this one used more cuts, but also customized the game speed using fast forward and slow motion in order to highlight specific situations of frags and minimize the time in between, which is why this editing technique increases the frag per minute ratio considerably. To give you an example, the now starting scene is actually almost a minute long in the original match recording. Here, it only lasts 10 seconds. Ready, Willing, Able also uses tracking shots, free-ranging camera and zoom in varying speed, depending on what suits the presented in-game action and the music best. Regarding the change of camera work and editing in order to establish a highly intensified continuity, a comparison to Casino Royale seems fitting.
Spectacular
while Mousesport's 2008 Ready, Willing, Able raised the bar for future productions, it also seemed like a point of culmination. Counter-Strike is a rather old game, and more players and viewers left the Counter-Strike scene, and accordingly, the number of big productions dropped. In the following years, most still active movie makers concentrated on shorter films of only 2 to 5 minutes length. There were no groundbreaking developments regarding new editing techniques or camera work. To stand out and introduce new ideas, these movies often showcase a lot of visual effects or massive alterations of the in-game recordings, resulting in unique looks. Examples for that would be Candy, The Pink Panther, and Ray Vaughn, that all include some comic elements in both senses of the word. However, these tendencies are not necessarily connected to the film industry or its developments, but rather to the declining demand for Counter-Strike movies. These were, in my opinion, some of the most important cornerstones of the progression of Counter-Strike Frag movies. Compared to one another, the changes in their directions are evident, and as I have shown, regarding the editing, they mirror the developments of film and post-classical cinema in many ways. Thanks for your attention, and feel free to leave a comment.
That's how Austrians say goodbye.
This is how we say goodbye in Germany, Dr. Jones. Oh!
I like the Austrian way better.